Is it okay to laugh? Are we allowed to laugh? Does laughing mean that we are lacking seriousness? Not necessarily, because what is seriousness? Seriousness is to fulfill one's duty. If you fulfill your duty, if you fulfill your obligations, what's wrong with having a good laugh? In this world that we live in, things are so stressful. There's often so many things to do, so many practical things that we become so involved and we forget that sometimes we just have to have a little laugh and to make our day a little easier. Well, today, I hope that watching this video, I have a book here about Saint John Marie Vianney, a great saint who is going to teach us an interesting lesson. And it's a kind of a funny story, so I wanted to share it with all of you who follow us on our program, Following the Saints. It's about venial sin. Oh, if we knew how grave one venial sin is. Venial sin, the only thing worse than venial sin is mortal sin. Mortal sin. One mortal sin deserves hell. One venial sin, St. Thomas Aquinas says we would deserve to die just by committing one venial sin. But let's take a look at this story from the life of John Marie Vianney. It is quite picturesque. It is quite funny. I hope you enjoy it. So what happened? The boys were talking amongst themselves, a few boys, they were talking, and they noticed all of a sudden that John Marie Vianney's orchard was being cut down. And what happened? These boys, they would often steal apples from his orchard. And so they said, oh no, his orchard is being torn down. What about our apples? Where are we going to get our apples now? But what happened? Every time they would steal an apple, it wasn't a mortal sin. It was a small venial sin, but it was a sin. And so Saint John Marie Vianney, he had such love for God that to protect those boys and also to spare the Sacred Heart of Jesus from another thorn that would pierce it, another venial sin, he decided to have his entire apple orchard cut down. Why? To prevent those boys from stealing any more apples. Some people would say, well, that's a very radical, what a drastic measure to take just to prevent a few boys from stealing a few apples. That doesn't do any harm. If we knew the harm that one venial sin does to the soul, and if we really had true love of God, we would understand the severe action of Saint John Marie Vianney. But another part of the story is that nobody in the town would cut down the trees. He could not hire anybody. He could not find anybody that was willing to cut down the apple trees because he lived in a small village full of farmers, full of people who have, a lot of admiration, a lot of love for nature. And nobody would do such a thing to cut down an apple tree. I mean, farmers know how long it takes for an apple tree to grow and it to start giving good fruit. It's years and years until the apples become what they're supposed to be. And all of a sudden, he's going to cut them down. That's crazy. The only way he was able to cut down the apple trees was to hire one of the dumbest people in the village, and he was the only one who would cut down the apple trees. And so the boys saw him cutting down. They said, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're cutting down the trees. And he said, no. The Saint Father John Marie Vianney asked me to. I'm just doing what he hired me to do. And so the boy said, well, I hope you're not lying. And they went over to Saint John Marie Vianney and said, did you really hire this man to cut down all of your trees? He said, yes, I did. Because the other day I was looking out the window and I saw that there were some people stealing from my apple trees. And that caused me a lot of sorrow because I saw that God was being offended. And so I hired this man to cut down all of the apple trees so that these boys would no longer sin on my property. But that's not the end of the story. Of course, the boys learned their lesson. And the boy who was responsible for stealing the apples, why did he steal the apples? Because when his father was a boy, his father would also go to that orchard and steal the apples. And his father told him about his innocent adventures. When the boy arrived back home that day, the mother gave one of those looks that only a mother, that only a wife can give to her husband, saying, you're responsible. You have responsibility in this case, and it's up to you, and you need to make up for it because you told your son how you also used to steal. And so that's where the story ends with the boy and his family. But the story continues because another parish priest also heard what had happened, that all of the trees were being cut down, and went up to St. John Marie Vianney and said, Father Vianney, what you're doing isn't so smart. What you're doing isn't so wise. Because in another monastery, another saint, Saint Fridolino, not Hodolfino, but Fridolino, he also was having the same problem. Boys were stealing from his orchard as well. And he did something different. What did he do? He put up a sign at the edge of his property, on his property line, saying, anybody who wants to take apples from the tree are allowed. Everybody can pick as many apples as they want. And so the parish priest, said, St. John Marie Vianney, you could have saved the boys from sinning and also saved your apple trees, just like this other saint had done, if you had done something similar. St. John Marie Vianney, in his simplicity and his great humility, said, you are totally right. I didn't think of that. I'm not very smart. I didn't think of that, but that would have been a much better solution. But oh well, the trees are cut down. There was nothing else they could do. Of course, St. John Marie Vianney did confess that he felt sorrow because he liked that apple orchard. He liked the beauty of it and the trees and everything, but he was willing to sacrifice that out of love for God. What lesson can we take for our lives? What lesson can we take for our lives? Very simple. All of us have an apple orchard. In other words, all of us have a place of occasional sin. All of us have some attachment to venial sin or mortal sin, and we need to ask St. John Marie Vianney strength to cut immediately all of our apple trees. In other words, all of those trees, those occasions of sin, is what I am talking about, that lead us away from God. Sin starts venially, but before we know it, we're also committing mortal sin. So let's cut down all of our apple trees, all of those occasions that lead us away from God. Remember that in paradise, it was enough for Adam and Eve to steal one apple that they broke their relationship with God, that sin entered into the world, and that until today, we are bearing the consequences of original sin. Of course, we probably wouldn't have done any different than them. We might have done even worse. Anyways, that would be for another episode of Following the Saints. Adam also did penance for 900 years. He made up for his sin. Surely, he is in heaven looking over all of us and is also willing to help us cut down all of our apple orchards. Well, Salve Maria, and we look forward to seeing you on our next program.